our parents from lower school joining us this morning on our webinar. I'm sorry we're not in person. We'll probably get tired of saying that, but it's true. Thanks for joining us for our lower school parent math morning. We have this morning every year around this time as a way to provide information about our math curriculum in the lower school. Part of that is because math instruction and curriculum has really changed over time since perhaps you were in elementary school. I know it has since I have, and you know, we did a lot of arithmetic in elementary school and not a whole lot of problem solving. And the demands for mathematics in our world have changed exponentially over the years. And our students are required to be not only strong with their arithmetic or their algorithms, their procedures, but they also need to be strong thinkers. They need to be problem solvers. They need to be able to build relationships between numbers, develop number reasoning and number sense. And that means that some of the curriculum has a more stronger conceptual foundation. And so we find that it's helpful for parents to get an overview of what we're doing and how we do what we do, so that you can really understand how to support your child, and also so you kind of know what's happening. When kids get into more advanced mathematics, it's not unusual for parents to say, I'm not even sure how to solve that problem, or they figured it out, but I wasn't sure. And I've been down that road with my own children as well as they get older and into more advanced mathematics. So the shift that we've made from mathematics to crunching numbers to mathematics as thinking has been an important shift. And I'd like to introduce our math specialist, Susan McHugh, who will do a review of our math curriculum for you. And while we're not live and people can't sort of pipe in with the questions by raising hands, I would invite you to use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen, and I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have a question, I'm happy to be the monitor there and ask the question through the presentation this morning. We will be recording this presentation, so parents who maybe would like the information can go back and revisit it, or if you'd like to see it again, if you have some spare time on a Friday night and you want to watch the math presentation, you can feel free to do so. So again, thanks for joining us, and I'd like to welcome Sue McHugh. Thanks, Sue.
Good morning, everybody. It is great to be here with all of you. I'm kind of chuckling at Sue's comment about, yeah, on a Friday night, you can sit down and watch this math video, because I'm sure probably that's the last thing. These weeks seem to be going by so quickly. On the other hand, it seems like we're all pouring lots and lots of energy into the school week this year, and we're lucky to be here. So anyway, as Sue said, I'm the math specialist in lower school, oversee the math program as well as teaching in grades 2nd through 5 every day. So I'm right in the midst of the kids and the work. So I feel like I come from a good place in talking to you about this program and the experience the students have, as well as the experience you may have from your chair. So let's get on with the presentation. The first place we want to start is, here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about the philosophy for a moment, talk individually about the programs in pre-K, early and upper elementary, talk about groupings, talk about Google Classroom, which is a new venture this year, and then just give you a highlight of what a math lesson, a daily math lesson might look like. So as Sue said, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter those into the chat room. So I like the way Sue was talking in the beginning about how math has changed from the way we all learned it. Today in the 21st century, we're talking about doing being a big part of the learning. One of the great things about GA's campus is we have lots and lots of space to practice our learning on. So it is not uncommon to see in the middle of a geometry lesson, students taking a shape walk on campus and noticing all the architectural details of the semicircles, the trapezoids, the quadrilaterals, even Connor Quad we talk about is a quadrilateral, and that's why we call it Connor Quad. So you may see kids with clotheslines out in the fields making a number line, or putting themselves with whiteboards holding up numbers or decimals and arranging themselves in orders. These are the types of things we mean as doing is part of the learning. No longer do we have the days where everybody sits with their hands folded at their desk looking at a teacher talking, presenting in the front of the room. We really try and make an effort of having the kids actively engaged. The basis of our math curriculum is inquiry and project-based. We try really hard to relate math to the real world. It used to be, I remember many years ago asking kids, when are you learning math? And the kids said, well, between 11 and 12, Monday through Friday. And I sort of cringed at that answer because math is happening all around you all the time. And so one of our goals is to help children see that math is just not a worksheet happening during your math period, but we're doing math all the time. I love watching the pre-K or kindergarten kids line up and the teachers not even, just lining up going to PE or going to a different class. The teacher will say, are we an even number or are we an odd number? Who is fourth in line today? How many girls do we have? How many boys do we have? So it begins very, very early on where we're constantly talking about numbers and numeracy and reinforcing those concepts. When we talk about project-based, one of my favorite lessons with some of my upper elementary kids are preparing Thanksgiving dinner. And how many math calculations are involved in just doing something like that, from the timing, from the number of pounds of turkey you get, from grocery shopping. There's been years where we compare buying the groceries at Giant and making dinner versus buying a prepared meal at like a Whole Foods or going to William Penn Inn. What are the price differentials between these choices? So we've done road trips to various parts across the country that involve miles and gas. All of these are things that help, that are really teaching our students the basic operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, but they do it in a way where kids can see it's relating to their real life. It's learning for a reason is what we like to say. So this I find very different from the way I learned. Each math topic or math lesson begins with an essential question. It's kind of I wonder or I ponder. And what it does is we try and get our kids collaborating together, talking about something before we even dive into the nuts and bolts of the lesson. So an example of that might be if I were beginning to teach subtraction with regrouping, which in our day we called borrowing and carrying. The essential question might be, how can we find differences between numbers? So the kids would take a look at something like a number, an 83 and a 47, and talk about what are the ways you can find the difference between those two numbers. You might find an equal number of second graders saying, well, I would add, I know 47 plus 3 gets me to 50. 50 to 80 is 30. So now I have 33, and 3 more would give me 36. Now, I said that in probably less than 30 seconds, but these are the things that kids would ponder together. Figure out, one child may say, well, I write it vertically, as you see here on the screen. And that child might say, I know to take from the 8, bring over to the 3, and do it this way. But there are many, many different ways to solve, and that's what we encourage, that kind of thinking, finding the differences. In the way I just voiced in finding 83 and 47, the basis of that approach was composing and decomposing numbers. You could see how I could take apart those numbers and then put them back together to give an answer. Another thing may be, if I were teaching a 5th grade class, I might ask them, how is it that a half divided by a quarter gives me a whole number? How can you divide fractions and get a quotient, an answer, that's bigger than either one of the numbers? How does that happen? So again, this kind of learning is the doing. They may sit down and cut up paper into halves and fourths or look for fraction strips in the room. But this is the basis of an introduction to a lesson on dividing fractions. You get them to think about it, to dig deep in what could happen, to listen to their ideas before you ever go to begin teaching the lesson. So when you look at that as the whole, what we say in lower school, and we really pride ourselves on this fact, that learning, math instruction begins with first building conceptual understanding. We don't want kids to be just parroting the steps to adding and subtracting or multiplying and dividing. We want them to really, really, truly understand how you can get a quotient of 2 when you're dividing 2 fractions. And that is the basis for every one of our lessons, every one of our skills that we teach. As we begin building that conceptual understanding, we follow that with learning the step-by-step skills on how to do an operation. So an example of this might be if I were teaching third graders how to multiply 2 digits by 1 digit. So for example, 45 times 3. I would think about it as, they first would look at it as, how many, if I look at how many 5 times 3, what are 3 5s worth? That's 15. And then they look at 3 40s. 3 times 40 is, 3 40s are 120. And then I add those 2 numbers together. We call that partial products. So the first time it's funny because the first time I give multiplication homework like this, and we're teaching it through partial products, building that conceptual understanding, invariably somebody comes into school the next morning and says, guess what? My dad taught me a shortcut. And we really, really appreciate the support and the help from home. But what's happened there is somebody said, oh, there's a much quicker way to do this. You just take 3 times 5, bring up the 1, 3 times 4 is 12, and you la la la. And why that's fine and dandy, and we do get to that point after a week or 2, we first start with partial products. So they're understanding how to compose and decompose numbers. If you think about it, it is the building of algebraic thinking of the distributive property that we're working with third graders. Finally, our goal always is to take the skills they've learned and apply these to real world problems. Again, this is what I said earlier about math being, relating math to the real world. In 5th grade a week ago and this week, we're teaching decimals. So the kids are understanding for the first time tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and they listen to these words And we start by saying there's an infinite number of digits or numbers to the right of a decimal point. And that decimal point has been invisible up till now, but really all whole numbers have a decimal point. So we start talking about it, and they look at you like you have three heads. What are these tenths, hundredths, and thousandths? And these are new names, and it's too similar to tens, hundreds, thousands. And what's the difference? And we tell them it's a piece, it's a part, but it's still kind of rumbling around in their head. But what we did on the second or third day of lessons, we talked about where would you ever need to think about hundredths and thousands, and how did those relate? It's kind of exciting because this year I have a math assistant working with me, Sam Johnson, who has been a wonderful addition to lower school math department. And she was telling the kids she has run a couple of Boston marathons, which the kids found so interesting. But she was telling them a story about how when you're a runner in the marathon, you get chips, and you tie these chips to your shoelaces. And the chip records your running time to the hundredth of a second. So that was mind blowing for these fifth graders. I mean, how fast is a hundredth of a second? And do you really need to look at the times down to that detail? We then started talking about the Olympics and how we were looking back in Olympic records when Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte were competing in all this swimming. And we took a look at their times, which in some cases went to the thousandth of a second. And we talked about how it used to be that people judged just based on looking at who came in first or second, but now how it's gotten so proficient with these time boards. So that's an example of taking the skills that the kids are learning in trying to conceptualize what a tenth and a hundredth and a thousandth is, and then showing them how these really apply in the real world and how they can be used. So that's kind of what we do day in and day out, any time of the day. We're looking at a lesson where we, even with our kindergartners, looking at the days on the calendar. And so today is the 30th, so they might have 3 straws for today, which represent 3 tens. And we're beginning to build that conceptual knowledge of tens and ones being part of 2-digit numbers. So let's move on. I feel like we should have a break from me talking, but math instruction happens here in lower school every day. I think it's funny when you talk to preschool parents, they say to their child, "Oh, did you have math lessons today?" And the kid goes, "No, no math today." And I sort of think that's a testament to how well we're doing our jobs here, because they're learning math all the time and don't even realize it's math work. In pre-K, we use the High Scope program for the math instruction. It has a lot of games and playing and counting in it so that the children really don't realize that what they're doing is a math lesson. But let's take a look at what that could look like in our early grades. Here, which we're bound to see soon, they're weighing pumpkins. And 2 of our little friends are looking at a scale and learning that a scale measures weight. How big is the pumpkin? We do a lot of lessons around Halloween with estimation. How many seeds do you think are inside this pumpkin? And then counting the seeds. And when I'm counting a whole bunch of seeds, it's really easy to get mixed up. So how could I help myself? How could it make it easier? And then somebody will pipe up with, well, let's put them in groups of 2, or let's put the seeds in groups of 5, because I can count by 5s. Or I know, how about 10s? That's the kind of learning that happens in a classroom, and they don't even realize that that's what they're doing. When a teacher's asked to help at lunchtime and cut an apple, you can hear her saying, "Shall I cut this in half? Shall I cut this in fourths?" 1/4 means one piece out of four. So they're learning fractions while they're cooking. Um, when I in fourth grade last year, when we were teaching fractions and we were teaching about adding a half and a quarter, we actually made chocolate chip cookie mix in the classroom. You know, those mason jars where you put in flour and sugar, and we measured out and combined and added fractions with unlike denominators. Here, this is an idea our pre-K teachers came up with a couple years ago. They used to do calendar every morning in pre-K and kindergarten. And you know, if you take a step back and think about a calendar from the eyes of a 5-year-old, it's pretty confusing. Like, who made it into these little boxes, and how do you know when you go to the next line? And what is the relationship between the top line and the bottom line? Really, what you're trying to do is teach sequential counting at this age. So why not make a linear calendar? So that's what pre-K is doing now. And you'll see this is a calendar on their whiteboard. And instead of having 7 days across and then they go down and get 7 more days in a week, those children aren't developmentally ready yet for that kind of thinking. But what they are learning is counting by ones sequentially. And so that's why this type of calendar, where they go from 1 to 30 or 31 every month, is really doing a better job of teaching them the skills they need at this age. We talked about shapes. Well, who doesn't love to build, right, when you're this age? And here you can see all the different kinds of shapes that they built. So what begins as just free play, maybe in the beginning of the year, can sometimes turn into something where, can you build a structure that has 3 rectangular blocks, a block that's a circle, and another block that is a sphere. All sorts of things you can do with this. Another great thing to do is connects, putting connects together in different shapes. Is it a 2-sided shape, a 3-sided shape, a 4-sided shape? These are all things that happen during a course of a day in our younger students. That's all math related and involved with math instruction. Deep breath, right? Okay, now moving on and talking about our kindergarten through 5th graders. We use what's this year is called Savvis Realize Envision Math Program. This was formerly Pearson Education. And what I was told this summer was that Pearson is trying to get out of the consumer book business and just go digital. So they sold off their portion of K through 12 to Savvis Realize. It's really been the same company. It's in the same building. They're just over in a different side of the building. But instead of called Pearson, it's Savvis. But it is the same program we've been using in the past. You'll see a line of the books here. This is kindergarten up through 5th grade. And all of your students, all of your children are now working with one of these books on a daily basis. There's 2 volumes that they get. And this is the framework for our program. That the beauty about being in an independent school is we are not forced to teach topic 1, lesson 1 today, lesson 2 tomorrow in a absolutely sequential way. I think the teaching teams at each one of these grade levels are meeting on a regular basis to talk about what parts of the program we really feel strongly about keeping and what parts of the program we may have a different approach to. And so while we say this is our framework, we are continually modifying what we do, either sequentially or how we may teach a lesson. So, for example, in the next month, students, especially upper elementary students, are going to be seeing lots and lots of graphs in the news. We're going to be talking a lot about the Electoral College and electoral votes. And so, what we may do is move in a unit on graphing into late October, November, and talk about how graphs tell stories. It's a way to tell a mathematical story in a picture. And it seems that in this year, that would be a really, really appropriate time to move up, to bounce up the graphing unit so that kids can really relate that again to real life. Super Bowl time is a wonderful time of year to study Roman numerals because they see the Super Bowl number everywhere leading up to that event. And so it's a good time that we would talk about that. It's always an interesting field trip to go down to the where Mrs. Holmes is now in the flex space, because there's a very old grandfather clock in that space that used to be the former lower school lobby. And what I love to point out to kids, I have them look at the face of the clock to see if they see anything different. And the 4 on the face of that clock is 4 eyes instead of an I and a V. So anyway, that brings about an interesting discussion as to how that happened. We talk about watches and how some watches have Roman numerals. I am moving on. Sue, you're going to let me know if there's any questions.
I definitely will. Right now, we're just all listeners.
Yeah, they're probably sleeping.
Actually, I do have one that just popped in.
Sure.
For students doing GA at home, have the math books been provided? And if not, will they be sent soon?
Yes, they, to my knowledge, they have all been provided. In grades 3 and 4 were the final grades to go into math groups, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so I believe students at home received those books in this weekend's bags.
If you do not have one, if for some reason you do not have one in your bag, you should reach out to your child's homeroom teacher and make sure that they put them in your bag for this Friday's pickup.
Correct. Thanks for that question. So in looking, doing a general overview of the program, the K through 2 program focuses on numeracy skills. We really kind of beat them over the heads with learning about numbers, adding and subtracting, putting numbers together, how to make 10. I'm sure to some of you it seems like we're almost doing this ad nauseum, but the fact is this time in developmentally for students between K and second grade is so, so important to laying the foundations of math. What they're really learning is, in some cases, algebraic foundations of distributive property, of composition and decomposition of numbers. This leads the way to, in third grade, what we really start naming as the distributive and associative properties. So it is really important here to us at school to make sure students have that foundation. One of the big benefits for myself of teaching second through fifth grade is that I absolutely see the flow of what happens from one grade to another. And in prior years, many years, I used to see, when I see some issues in third grade as we begin multiplication and them not really fully understanding how to take apart numbers, and when I earlier mentioned the partial products, I realized that they missed that foundational piece. So I know many of you out there are so supportive of your children, and really are very quite proud of the fact that maybe by second grade they know all their addition and subtraction algorithms. They even know how to multiply. I was working with a second grade student the other day who kind of blew my mind when I was asking her how she solved a problem mentally, and as she was telling me, this was all via Zoom, she said, well, I just multiplied 2 times 3. Everyone knows that's 6. And then I said, really? Like 7 times 7? And she was like, 49. So that's wonderful. I mean, certainly that is a really important skill, is to automaticity and knowledge of your basic facts, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And that is a big part of the equation. But even more important to us is the conceptual knowledge behind those things. So oftentimes, I'm not oftentimes, but occasionally I'll hear from parents who'll say to me, in first or second grade, my child knows all these skills of adding and subtracting, and I feel like they're not being challenged. Well, our assessments that we talk about, that the children all took in September, not only test those basic facts, but they really test conceptual knowledge. Does a child understand what expanded and standard form is? Can they take a number like in that earlier subtraction problem where we had 83? Can they tell me that 88 tens and 3 ones is the same as 7 tens and 13 ones? So years ago, when I was learning subtraction, I would borrow and carry. Then, as I became a math instructor, I thought, what is borrow and carry? You're not borrowing anything. What you're really doing is renaming 83 from 8 tens and 3 ones to actually 7 tens and 13 ones. And the way we drive that home during this age period is with base 10 blocks, where they're actually sitting at the desk or at the table, and they're using base 10 blocks to break down a 10 into 10 ones. That's the start of all of our teaching with this. Expanded notation. Okay, children learn to break up a number like 425 into a 400, a 20, and a 5. That progresses to in fifth grade, where we're using base 10, and they're learning the powers of 10 with exponents to write that expanded notation. So everything builds on what they're learning in the younger grades to coming up into the higher grades. So though a child may have learned or memorized the algorithms, and an algorithm is a word, we teach that word in kindergarten, to be honest. It's the steps to doing a problem. You take this number and do this, you start at the ones, you go from the top to the bottom, etc. That's what we refer to as the algorithm, the series of steps. But what we're really trying to get them to do before they move to an algorithm is to make sure they have that conceptual base. If we haven't laid that down properly in this age group, I can tell you we run into difficulty in the upper elementary grades. Now, looking at upper elementary, here we focus on multiplication, division, all operations with decimals and fractions, measurement, and problem solving, I should say, is done all the time, involved in all of our lessons. So here at GA, in grades 3 through 5, we are really teaching 4 years of math. So when our children leave 5th grade, they will have completed what public school children will have done in 6th grade. And the reason for that is the vast majority, 95% of our 5th graders move on to pre-algebra in 6th grade. So all the foundations have to get done here. I work very closely with the middle, understanding how to prepare our kids best for that higher level of math in middle school. And I think we have a really good relationship going back and forth all the time. So this is the focus. You'll see the curriculum becomes a little more rigorous in grades 3 through 5, and that is the reason. So what you saw as the SAVAS framework, in third, fourth, and fifth grade, we start adding additional lessons. So we go, what I like to say is off book. And in third grade, we don't stop with just single digit multiplication. We go to 2-digit multiplication by 1 digit, and we start long division, which also is not necessarily a third grade skill in other schools. But as I said, we've stretched it out over 3 years so that our students are prepared for pre-algebra in sixth. Moving on, included in our 7-day rotation is computer science. This I'm really proud of. We have a department chair now of computer science, Jason Oswald, who is the department chair in upper school and kind of works with us and oversees our program. The skills that your child will be learning while in lower school, the skills of computer science are what you see, these 6 skills in front of you. The first skill of sequence is really an algorithm. But we do teach kindergartners the word algorithm. But what this sequence learning begins with in kindergarten may be the steps to planting a seed and growing a flower. It might be a recipe, the steps you take in building a recipe. In learning about loops, what we first will do is introduce the idea of repeated loops through dance. We may be doing the hokey pokey or the chicken dance or the Macarena. And again, this is a way to teach our learners about loops. We proceed from what we call unplugged lessons to actual lessons on the computer where they're following sequences and following loops, conditionals, and by 5th grade, we're up to functions and variables. I met with Jason last week, and we talked about ways that we can have more unplugged lessons in computer science this year, since the kids seem to spend more time on screens than they had previously. So he is making himself available once every 2 weeks to lower school teachers to help with professional development on how to work with this program this year. So very exciting. Instructional groupings. This is something many of you are familiar about. We do a lot of assessing during the month of September, and we try and find what we call the just right skill-based groups for our students. Because I jump into the teaching mix as well as Ms. Johnson, we can have smaller math groups than we have homeroom groups. We feel this is the best way for learning. This year, we're very mindful of our cohorts and safe distancing guidelines in forming the groups. So we took a little bit of a different stand in how we did it. And by each grade, for each grade level, we looked at the cohorts and the classrooms within that grade in looking at putting together math groups. So we were minimizing the mixings of students and mindful of maintaining cohorts. And of course, the safe distance guidelines for the number of students in a room. The tests we take are, the one test was a SAVAS curriculum-based test. We had open-ended problem solving. We looked at knowledge of basic facts. And of course, teacher observations are very, very important. Basically, skills go into forming groups, but a lot of other things, timing, pacing, a child's self-esteem and how they feel about themselves. All of those things go into our groupings. And like I said, now we are all in our math groups and working away. This year, we introduced Google Classroom. So I have to say, the teachers got together with administration and thought about, Sue had asked us about our wins and our challenges during the spring semester with virtual learning. And upon reflection and thinking about that, and with some professional development that we took over the summer, it was decided that Google Classroom might be the best thing that we could do for families, for students, and our faculty. It links directly with many programs that we use, with the math program, Words Their Way, Code.org, IXL, Seesaw, BrainPop, Smart. We thought this might be much easier if all the work and all the links was in one place. So how that might look in the early elementary grades is that on your, this is 1N, Mrs. Na's class and Mrs. Park, and they have a welcome here to their classroom. And you can see up in this corner, it said readers, writers, and math. So and then you see the icon here at the bottom by Mrs. Na's feet that's a Google Classroom icon. So if you click on that, it will take you to the classroom. Or if you click on the math, you get another slide that will take you directly to Savas Realize, to IXL, or Rainbow Math. And here is where we're just learning this now. We're just acclimating the students in the early grades. So they're going to be taught that they can go into Google Classroom to get these links. And as I said, it is just a touch to get to different places. With our upper elementary grades, there is a separate math Google Classroom. So this Google Classroom here is my 5th grade math group. And if I can go to a new share. So here's what Google Classroom, my 5th grade students who are in the group that Miss Johnson and I teach, they would come to their Google Classroom that would look like this. The meat of the, here you have upcoming, they have something due today, and due tomorrow is we're adding and subtracting decimals. But here is classwork. I think on the iPads it's at the bottom of the screen. But if you go into classwork, you'll see every teacher is busy developing their Google Classrooms right now. So they may all look a little differently for different teachers. And we ask you, please, please be patient with us as we learn this ourselves. I do have to tell you, every lower school faculty member worked the month of August in learning Google Classroom. We kind of sprung this on them the first week of August, that this was a move. We were going to be moving from Veracross to Google Classroom. And it was unanimous that they saw the benefits of this and wanted to do it. But in doing that, we're still learning it ourselves as we teach the children. So here, you have a direct link to the math book. So all the kids have to do is click on here and it takes them directly to their math book. Here, which is tomorrow, is a YouTube video on adding and subtracting decimals. It's been assigned to 8 students and nobody obviously has done it since I just did it this morning. Here is a solve and share. Here was last night's homework. So every week, this is where the students will go. The thing that is the newest post is always on the top. At the bottom of this Google Classroom is a whole set of resources. So again, the math book. And if you go to resources with a touch, they can go to IXL, they can go to Seesaw, they can go to Smart, or this was a recent handout I did on the powers of 10, which I made available to students. Again, like I mentioned before, there's links to code.org that takes them directly to their computer science course, to Seesaw, and then a Zoom link. So if I go back to our presentation, as I said, I think what this means for families is this is one-stop shopping. It's like Target, right? The faculty is so busy becoming Google experts. We have Barney McDonald, who happens to be she got her certification in Google training this summer and has been working really very hard in getting teachers up to speed with all the things. One of the things I think you're going to really like is these guardian notices. So we can invite families to participate in guardian notices, and that means that you will get a notice once a week on what work has been posted or assigned to your student, what they've turned in, and what may not yet be turned in. So here you can go in and look at exactly what's happening in that class. Um, we're all laughing because we're kind of working with how to do this, because as we're learning how to play with Google Classroom and what we can post, we're assigning the kids all sorts of things that we're really not intentionally meaning that they have to go home and do all at once. We're just playing with what we can assign, what it looks like to the student, how they access it. So if you're getting a whole bunch of notices that your kid isn't doing his work, don't worry. It's probably us just playing right at this moment.
Sue, can I interrupt you with a question?
Absolutely.
One of the questions we have is for students attending school in person. Do they also complete the assignments in the Math Google Classroom?
Yes. Yes. Because their math group may be different from their homeroom group. And so all the teachers in 3rd through 5th have their own math Google Classroom. I believe that's also true in 2nd. Does that answer your question?
We'll see.
Okay.
We have another question as well. Not everybody sees Google Classrooms in their math currently.
Okay, so what I would do is, if that's the case, it may be that teachers have not yet introduced that. As I said, we just began math groups in some of the grades yesterday. And so if that's the case, I would email your child's homeroom teacher, or if they have a different math teacher, email that math teacher. Or you can always email me and I can look into it.
And another question, Sue, shifting gears a little bit to math fact practice, was about Rainbow Math. Are our students doing Rainbow Math this year?
That we leave up to individual teachers. I know I personally am doing Rainbow Math. I know that 3rd grade is using, some of the 3rd grade teachers are using something called Extra Math. So I think what happens is when a teacher looks at the students that are in front of them in their math group, they are assessing how well they know their facts. And once they've assessed that, they can determine what is the best way to help that particular group of students, the just right way to help that particular group of students progress through their facts.
And just to name what Rainbow Math is, for people who aren't familiar with that, it's just a differentiated approach to teaching kids math facts. The kids will work at their own pace, but there are a couple different programs we use for math fact practice.
Right.
And then Sue, another question was, will we be receiving assessment scores home this year?
Yes, we will. I think they will be coming home within a month, certainly prior to conference time.
And do you want to talk about the envelopes that are easy to recognize, Sue?
Yes, so we will be, as we have in the past, we'll be sending home, we test children on a regular basis as we do each topic. I think one thing you should understand is that because math groups are smaller, I was telling Miss Johnson this the other day, the beauty of small math groups is that a teacher has always got her finger on the pulse of what her kids know and don't know, and who needs some extra support or who needs some extra challenge. So I don't feel that I have to be testing them once a week. In fact, sometimes I don't like to do that because it takes out of instructional time for me. But I think that on a regular basis, you'll be seeing topic tests come home in an orange folder. And that folder goes home for you to look at the tests, to sign, and then send back to school. So that's our way of being transparent and keeping you informed of the testing that's happening here in school.
Thanks, Sue. I think, let's see, I have one more question. I'm not sure what the question, I think it's related to getting information. How do we get notices for math work due? And I'm guessing that's on Google Classroom. I'm guessing the question is related to Google Classroom, but I'm not sure.
Sure. As what's going to happen is, as the Google Classroom term for families is guardians. So what the teacher will do is invite you with your email address, which we will get through the Veracross listings, invite you through that email address, and the notices will be sent to you personally through that email address.
All right, thanks, Sue. Why don't we continue? We probably have about 5 minutes left.
Right. So just to, I feel like I may know all of you since I was probably in your living rooms all during the spring, and you have a very good idea of what a math lesson looks like. But just to recap that, what an everyday math lesson might look like from your students' view is they walk into class and there is some sort of a warm-up. This warm-up can be anything from reading a storybook, a number of the day, which we would have seen in the math packets this summer. It can be a game we play, I have, who has, or it could be a worksheet on a review what you know, or it could be one of those solve and shares, one of those I wonder and pondering questions that I talked about earlier in the presentation. That is followed by a lesson. Our book, Savas, provides a video, only 2 or 3 minutes on the meat of each lesson. Sometimes we show that video in a math lesson. Sometimes we show something from Brain Pop or from Discovery or from YouTube. But there's some animated, or a teacher may may even just stand up and present the meat of the lesson. But that's something we do, and let's say that's a 15 or 20-minute span in a classroom. And that is the meat of a new skill that we're talking about that's presented to the children. And then that is followed by practice. The practice can look like the kids getting up out of their seats and going to the boards in the classroom and playing a game, doing problems. It could look like a dice game. It could look like an app on their iPad or a smart Jeopardy game. So that's how we end up practicing. It changes day to day, of course, to keep the kids engaged and on their toes. It can be outside looking at things or building a number line in the hallway. And then the homework generally is for them to practice that new skill that they've learned in class that day. That generally is the purpose of homework. So in summary, I think we've made the point of saying our program is designed to provide them with a conceptual foundation. And from that, we build on skills and critical thinking. I'm available to meet with anybody via Zoom if you should have any questions or like to talk further about it. Any kind of topics, my email is right there for you to reach out. I certainly want to thank all of you for coming on this beautiful sunny morning and listening to this. I certainly enjoy talking about what I do, and like the fact that you're keeping on top of things and wanting to be informed. So I appreciate your attendance here today.
And I just want to thank you, Sue, for the great work you do at school with both our math and technology and coding, and making sure that we're continually moving forward and thinking about the landscape of math education, but also thinking about the landscape of the world our students are entering, and making sure that they're well prepared. So thanks. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Again, we'll record this, we'll post this on our Google site. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.